The winter of 1943 had come with a merciless bite across Europe. In the outskirts of Dresden, snow fell like ash, covering the ruins of buildings that had once stood proud, the walls echoing with the laughter of families that were now gone. Lena Fischer pressed herself against the remnants of her home, her eyes scanning the horizon where smoke met clouds. The city had been bombed once, then again, leaving skeletons of streets and hollowed-out shells of lives. Lena's family had not survived the first wave, and yet, against despair, she had survived. Survival alone, she realized, was no longer enough. Every day she watched neighbors vanish, whispers of resistance and betrayal mingling with the cold wind. Courage, she decided, was a choice and act of defiance in the face of oblivion. Lena had heard stories of ordinary people performing extraordinary feats, small acts that rippled into waves of hope. She wanted to be one of them. On the northern edge of the city, Samuel Novak crouched behind a collapsed wall. A Polish resistance fighter, Samuel had traveled through villages burnt and scarred, smuggling messages, food, and hope to those who had none. He was trained in silence, stealth, and strategy, yet he had never seen destruction on this scale. As he watched Lena moving cautiously across the street, he felt a flicker of recognition, not of familiarity, but of intent. She was like him, someone refusing to yield to fear. Their meeting was accidental, a collision of necessity. Lena had been retrieving a bundle of ration bread from a hidden cache when the German patrol surged unexpectedly. Samuel, hidden in the shadows, could see the danger she was in. He stepped forward, voice low and steady, "This way, quickly." Lena, startled, hesitated for a heartbeat, but something in the urgency of his tone convinced her. She followed him through back alleys, crumbling staircases, and snow-covered courtyards until they reached the basement of an abandoned bakery. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old flour and mildew. Samuel set down a small tin box, one he had been tasked to deliver safely. "It is from the resistance," he explained. "Documents, coded messages, they read vital." Lena's fingers traced the edges of the box. "I don't know if I can help," she said softly. "I am just alone." "No one is just alone," Samuel said. "Every person counts, even you." His eyes, a pale grey against the dim light, carried the weight of someone who had seen too much death, but refused to let it define him. Lena nodded. There was truth in his words. Perhaps courage was contagious, and perhaps it had found her at last. The days that followed were a blur of planning, reconnaissance, and quiet acts of rebellion. Lena learned quickly. Samuel taught her to read coded messages, move without making a sound, and observe without being seen. They distributed intelligence to other resistance cells, sabotaged supply lines, and helped civilians escape when the German patrols grew too aggressive. Winter hardened into spring, and with it came the sharp realization that courage alone was not enough. Each mission carried the risk of death, each success invited vengeance, and every act of heroism left scars on the soul. Lena remembered the faces of those who had vanished from her street, their absence a constant reminder of the stakes. Yet, with every step into danger, she found something new within herself, a strength she had never known existed. One night, under a sky heavy with snow clouds, Lena and Samuel planned a particularly daring mission to intercept a train carrying weapons and prisoners destined for the front. Failure meant not just death, but the loss of countless lives depending on their success. Samuel briefed her quietly in the abandoned bakery. "You'll need to blend in," he said. "Timing is everything, and if anything goes wrong—" His voice trailed off, a rare moment of vulnerability. Lena understood. They had no safety net. But hesitation was a luxury neither could afford. The mission began at dusk. Lena, disguised as a local civilian, walked the frozen tracks to where the train was scheduled to pass. Samuel waited in the shadows, signaling with faint movements. The cold gnawed at her fingers and toes, but the thought of those trapped on the train lent her courage. When the train appeared, a dark iron snake against the snowy landscape, Lena's pulse quickened. She planted charges on the tracks, moving with a precision born of necessity. Each second felt eternal, the rhythm of danger matching her heartbeat. When the train derailed with a controlled explosion, chaos erupted. Guards scrambled, prisoners took tentative steps toward freedom, and Lena felt a surge of exhilaration tempered by the knowledge that not all would survive. Samuel pulled her to safety, and they watched as the fire illuminated the forest like a beacon of defiance. Weeks turned into months. The war as tide shifted unpredictably. Allies advanced, retreated, and shifted again. In the midst of turmoil, Lena became a symbol within the local resistance, a living reminder that courage could exist even in the most brutal circumstances. But heroism came at a cost. Friends were lost, operations failed, and the weight of responsibility pressed on her. One day, while aiding a group of children to safety from a bombing raid, Lena saw a young boy clutching a faded photograph of his parents. He looked at her with wide, frightened eyes. In that instant, Lena understood fully why she fought. Not for glory, not for recognition, but for the lives of those who could not defend themselves. Each small act of courage, each whispered secret and hidden document, created ripples that might one day outlast the war. The final months of the conflict were a maelstrom. Lena and Samuel found themselves deep behind enemy lines, coordinating intelligence to guide Allied forces, sabotaging communications, and rescuing those left to the mercy of the Germans. The world had become a constant blur of shadows, gunfire, and quiet heroism. Yet even in the darkest nights, Lena remembered the snow-covered streets of Dresden, the faces of her family, and the promises she had made to protect others. The day the war in Europe ended, Lena stood amidst the ruins of a once bustling city. Smoke still curled from chimneys, rubble lined the streets. But there was also a fragile sense of hope. Survivors emerged from hiding, embracing, crying, and mourning simultaneously. Samuel stood beside her, and for a moment the enormity of their journey settled upon them. They had survived, yes, but more importantly, they had acted. They had made a difference. Lena thought of the countless lives touched by courage, the ordinary people who became heroes in their own way. Every message delivered, every train stopped, every child saved, it was all part of a legacy larger than herself. The war had taken much, but it had also revealed something eternal, the capacity of the human spirit to endure, resist, and illuminate even the darkest corners of history. As she walked through the ruins, Lena whispered a vow into the wind. We will remember, we will carry courage forward. And somewhere, in the echoes of fallen cities and the hearts of those who survived, the message of hope spread quietly, like seeds carried on the winter wind, waiting to blossom in a world reborn. The early months of 1944 brought a brutal spring to Europe. Snow lingered in patches, stubborn as the people who survived the winters. For Lena Fischer and Samuel Novak, survival was no longer enough. They had become agents of hope in a world consumed by fear. Their successes against the German supply lines and their work with scattered resistance cells had earned them a reputation among both allies and enemies. But notoriety was a double-edged sword. Every victory drew sharper attention, and every step forward carried the weight of lives depending on them. One morning, Lena woke to the faint sound of whispers outside the bakery's hidden cellar. Samuel was already awake, leaning over maps spread across a rough wooden table. The maps were annotated with chalk, lines and symbols marking patrol routes, supply depots, and the most dangerous sectors of the city. They've increased patrols near the northern district, Samuel said without looking up. His voice was steady, but there was an undercurrent of tension. Intel suggests they're researching for resistance cells more aggressively now. Lena rubbed her eyes, trying to shake off the fatigue that had begun to settle deep in her bones. We need to warn the others, she said, and prepare a diversion if they come this way. Samuel nodded. Exactly. WLL split into teams. ULL take the eastern sector with Marek and Hannelore. ILL handle the north. The whispering alley should remain clear. It is our best escape route if the patrols get too close. The mention of Marek and Hannelore reminded Lena of the small network of resistance members she had come to trust. Each of them carried a story of loss, courage, and defiance. Marek, a former schoolteacher, had lost his family to a bombing raid and now devoted himself to sabotaging the enemy. Hannelore, once a nurse, had smuggled wounded civilians through the city's ruins, earning a reputation for ingenuity and bravery. Together, they were a family forged in fire, united by the singular purpose of fighting tyranny. By midday, Lena, Marek, and Hannelore moved through the streets with practiced caution. Their movements were silent, almost invisible, as they delivered messages, distributed supplies, and reassured terrified families that help was near. Every encounter reinforced Lena's resolve. Every frightened glance of a child reminded her that courage was not abstract, it was tangible, vital, and immediate. The operation that day was simple in theory, but complex in execution. A German supply convoy was scheduled to pass through the eastern sector, carrying weapons and provisions for the front. The resistance had learned its timetable through careful observation, coded messages intercepted from patrols, and a network of sympathizers within the city. Lena's task was to create a controlled disruption, forcing the convoy to hold long enough for Samuel's team to sabotage its contents. As they approached the street where the convoy would appear, Lena's heart thrummed with anticipation. Hannelore handed her a small satchel containing explosives and signaling devices. "The timing is everything," Hannelore whispered. "One misstep and the entire mission fails." Lena nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing on her. She placed the charges strategically, each movement deliberate, precise. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from fear alone, but from the awareness that the lives of civilians and resistance members alike depended on her success. When the convoy arrived, it was a long, rumbling serpent of steel, its engines drowning out all other sounds. Lena signaled to Samuel's team across the rooftops. Within moments, coordinated explosions disabled the convoy's wheels and blocked the street. Guards scrambled, shouting orders, but the chaos allowed prisoners hidden among the cargo to escape, aided by Merrick and Hannelore. As the last of the prisoners disappeared into the alleyways, Lena felt a surge of triumph tempered by exhaustion. "We did it," she whispered, almost in disbelief. "We actually did it." Samuel appeared moments later, his face flushed with adrenaline. "Yes," he said, "but we can't linger. Reinforcements will be coming." He gestured to the whispering alley, the narrow corridor of shadows that would take them safely out of the sector. Lena followed him, moving swiftly but cautiously, aware that the enemy's presence was now heightened. That night, the resistance gathered in the ruins of an old factory, converted into a makeshift command post. Maps, documents, and supplies littered the room. Fires crackled in barrels, casting flickering shadows on the walls. Lena stood among the group, her chest heavy with both pride and fatigue. They had succeeded, but at a cost. A young recruit had been caught during the convoy disruption and would likely face severe consequences. Samuel approached her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You've grown stronger," he said. "I've seen you adapt, think ahead, and inspire others. That courage you carry is not just yours, it's Brett's." Lena swallowed hard. "Sometimes I wonder if it is enough," she admitted. "If all we do truly changes anything." "It does," Samuel replied firmly. "Every life saved, every shipment delayed, every act of defiance matters. Even if the world doesn't notice, history will remember the choices we made." The words resonated with Lena. She thought of her family, of the children she had helped escape the city's destruction, and of countless ordinary people who had refused to yield to fear. Courage, she realized, was cumulative. Each act, no matter how small, built a legacy that could not be erased. Weeks passed, and spring edged toward summer. The city remained a dangerous landscape, but Lena and Samuel continued their work undeterred. One evening, as they navigated the ruins to deliver crucial intelligence to Allied contacts, they encountered a group of civilians hiding in the basement of a burned-out apartment. Among them was a young girl, no older than 10, clutching a tattered doll and trembling with fear. Lena knelt beside her, offering a reassuring smile. "It is all right," she said softly. "You're safe now." The girl looked up, her eyes wide, and for the first time that day, Lena felt the full weight of what they were fighting for. Courage was not just about sabotage or intelligence, it was about protecting the innocent, carrying hope into the darkest corners of the world. Samuel watched from the doorway, his gaze steady. "We keep moving," he said, "but never forget what we were saving them for." The night was filled with quiet determination. Lena, Samuel, and the resistance members guided the civilians to safer areas, evading patrols and avoiding detection. Each step was calculated, each decision a balance between risk and reward. When dawn finally broke, they had successfully relocated the civilians to a hidden safe house on the outskirts of the city. By late 1944, the tides of war were shifting. Allied forces advanced, yet the German military remained formidable. Lena and Samuel's work grew even more critical as they coordinated with multiple resistance cells, sharing intelligence that could impact the outcomes of battles. Their small acts of courage were no longer isolated, they were threads in a larger tapestry woven across a continent in turmoil. One evening, Lena found herself alone in the safe house, reviewing documents that detailed upcoming missions. Samuel had gone to confer with other resistance leaders, leaving her with the quiet hum of responsibility. She paused, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here from a frightened girl surviving Dresden as bombings took key play in the resistance. The transformation had been forged through loss, fear, and relentless determination. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Merrick entered, his expression grave. "There as news," he said. "A new operation critical intelligence must be delivered to the Allies before the end of the month. It is dangerous, more dangerous than anything we attempted." Lena straightened. "Then we go," she said. The decision was instinctive. Courage, she realized, was not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. The days leading up to the operation were a whirlwind of preparation. Lena, Samuel, Merrick, and Hannelore coordinated logistics, studied maps, and memorized patrol routes. Every move was deliberate, every second counted. When the night of the mission arrived, they moved through shadows, guided by the faint light of the moon and the unwavering determination. The operation took them through abandoned factories, over frozen rivers, and into enemy territory. Lena's heart pounded with each step, yet she felt a sense of clarity she had never known. Fear existed, but it was harnessed, transformed into purpose. They delivered the intelligence, sabotaged enemy operations, and escaped without detection, a triumph that seemed almost impossible in a world ruled by chaos. As 1945 approached, the war drew to a close, yet the echoes of courage remained. Lena and Samuel stood amidst ruins, survivors emerging from hiding, families reuniting, and cities slowly rebuilding. They had endured loss, witnessed unimaginable suffering, and yet they had acted. Each choice, each risk had carried the weight of humanity itself. Lena thought of the children, of the prisoners saved, of the countless ordinary people who had risen to extraordinary acts. Courage, she realized, was eternal. It existed not in monuments or accolades, but in the hearts of those who refused to surrender to fear. And as Lena and Samuel looked toward the horizon, where smoke and sunlight mingled over a continent scarred but unbroken, they understood the truth. Even in the darkest times, humanity could shine. Acts of bravery, compassion, and resilience would echo across generations, a reminder that courage is not given, it is chosen, again and again, by those who dare to act. The summer of 1945 approached with a strange duality. There was both hope and danger in the air. While Allied forces advanced and cities were liberated, pockets of resistance and occupation remained, and for Lena Fischer and Samuel Novak, the work was far from over. Their mission had grown in scope and complexity. No longer were they merely disrupting supply lines or helping civilians escape. They were now orchestrating operations that could influence the outcome of entire regions. One morning, as the sun struggled to pierce the smoke-laden sky, Lena awoke in the hidden safe house, a faint smell of soot and bread in the air. Samuel was already awake, examining a series of maps pinned to the wall. The maps were dotted with symbols representing patrols, checkpoints, and escape routes, each marked with careful precision. "Another intelligence drop tonight," Samuel said, his tone calm but edged with urgency. "We have to reach the courier before he is intercepted. If the information falls into the wrong hands, it could cost hundreds of lives." Lena nodded, adjusting the straps of her worn satchel. "We can't fail. Not now, not after everything we've done." Her voice held a quiet determination that had become second nature over the past 2 years. Fear still existed, lurking in the shadows of her mind, but courage had replaced hesitation. They set out before dusk, moving through alleyways and abandoned streets, their presence almost invisible under the cover of early evening. The city had changed. Bombed-up buildings now stood as skeletal sentinels, witnesses to the horrors that had passed. Yet life persisted. Children played in the rubble, shopkeepers cautiously reopened stalls, and survivors rebuilt what they could, one brick at a time. It was a fragile resilience, but it mirrored Lena's own journey from a terrified girl to a woman capable of inspiring hope in others. Their first challenge came swiftly. As they approached a bridge that spanned the frozen river on the city's edge, they noticed movement, a small group of German soldiers patrolling the area. Lena signaled to Samuel, and they took cover behind the remnants of a collapsed wall. "They will see us if we cross here," Lena whispered. Samuel surveyed the patrols, calculating their positions. "We'll wait for the guards to change shifts. Then we move quickly, stay low, and stick to the shadows." Time stretched, each second heavy with tension. Finally, when the patrol shifted, Lena and Samuel darted across the bridge, hearts pounding. The icy wind cut through their coats, but they pressed onward, knowing that hesitation could mean capture or worse. On the far side, they found the courier, a wiry man with sharp eyes and a nervous energy. "You have it?" Samuel asked. The courier handed over a leather-bound satchel. Lena opened it briefly to confirm its contents: maps, documents, and coded messages detailing enemy troop movements, supply lines, and plans for upcoming offensives. It was the intelligence they needed to coordinate with Allied forces as a single delivery that could change the course of operations in the region. As they prepared to leave, the distant sound of engines reached their ears. "We were not alone," Lena said, tension tightening her chest. They moved swiftly into the woods, guided by the faint light of the moon, each step a delicate balance between speed and caution. For hours they navigated the forest, the weight of the satchel pressing against Lena's side. She thought of the children, the families, and the countless civilians whose lives depended on their success. Courage was not a grandiose act. It was a series of choices made in the face of uncertainty, a constant recommitment to hope. Eventually, they reached the rendezvous point, where resistance members and Allied contacts waited. The intelligence was transferred without incident, and Lena felt a surge of relief that mingled with exhaustion. Samuel clapped her on the shoulder. "Well done, you've done more than survive, you've made a difference." Yet their work was far from over. That night, as they rested in the safe house, Lena received word of a new threat. A traitor within the network had been feeding information to the Germans. The realization struck hard. Trust, once freely given, now had to be measured and tested at every turn. The following days were consumed with planning and vigilance. Lena and Samuel worked to identify the traitor, meticulously reviewing messages, cross-referencing operations, and observing the behaviors of their allies. It was a delicate and dangerous game. One false move could end in catastrophe. Finally, the evidence pointed to a young recruit named Klaus, who had been coerced into betraying the network under threat to his family. Lena faced him in the dim light of the safe house, her voice calm but firm. "Klaus, the lives of hundreds depend on every decision we make. Why?" Tears welled in Klaus's eyes. "They threatened my sister. I didn't know what else to do." Lena's heart ached for him, understanding the impossible choices were imposed. "You can still make this right," she said. "Help us, redeem yourself, protect those who cannot protect themselves." Klaus nodded, relief and fear mingling in his expression, and together they devised a plan to feed false intelligence back to the Germans, turning betrayal into a weapon. Summer deepened, and with it came some of their most daring operations. Lena and Samuel coordinated multiple missions simultaneously, from sabotaging rail lines to smuggling civilians out of occupied territories. Each operation tested their courage, ingenuity, and endurance. Lena learned to read patterns in patrols, to anticipate enemy strategies, and to make split-second decisions that could mean life or death. One night, as they moved through a moonlit village, they encountered a group of children hiding in the ruins of a school. The children were frightened, hungry, and cold. Lena knelt among them, offering food and comfort. "We were here to help," she whispered. Their wide eyes, filled with fear and hope, reminded her why every risk mattered. Courage, she realized, was as much about protecting innocence as it was about defeating tyranny. Samuel observed quietly, admiration and pride in his gaze. "You've changed," he said softly. "Not just in skill, but in purpose. You've become a symbol of hope." Lena smiled faintly, acknowledging the compliment but keeping her focus. There was work to be done, lives to save, and battles yet to fight. By autumn, Allied forces were pressing into enemy territory, and the city where Lena and Samuel operated became a crucial hub for resistance efforts. Their network had grown, uniting disparate groups into a coordinated force capable of significant disruption. Lena, once an ordinary survivor, had become a linchpin in operations that impacted thousands. Yet the stakes grew higher with each success. Enemy reprisals became more frequent and more violent. Allies advanced, but the cost in civilian lives was never insignificant. Lena and Samuel faced moral dilemmas daily, balancing strategic necessity with compassion. Every decision carried consequences that weighed heavily on their minds and hearts. One evening, Lena found herself overlooking the city from a high vantage point. Smoke curled from distant fires, lights flickered in the ruins, and the wind carried the faint echoes of a world war. She thought of all she had witnessed, the devastation, the courage, the fleeting moments of humanity, and she understood the essence of hope. It was fragile, yet resilient. Small acts could ripple outward, touching lives in ways no one could predict. Samuel joined her silently. "We've come far," he said. But the final push is coming. The operations we planned will determine the fate of this city and many others. Lena nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility but also the strength born of experience. Then we continue, she said. For them, for all of them. The final months of the war were a maelstrom. Lena and Samuel led operations that required coordination across multiple fronts, disrupting enemy communications, securing intelligence, and protecting civilians as they were evacuated from dangerous zones. Each mission demanded ingenuity, courage, and unwavering resolve. Lives were lost and sacrifices were made, yet the resistance pressed on. Through it all, Lena's understanding of courage deepened. It was not merely the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. It was choosing to help when the world seemed indifferent, to resist when oppression seemed inevitable, and to carry hope into the darkest corners of human experience. When the war finally ended in 1945, Lena stood among the ruins, watching as survivors emerged, families reunited, and cities began the slow, painful process of rebuilding. Samuel stood beside her, their hands brushing lightly a silent acknowledgement of the journey they had shared. Lena thought of every person they had helped, every life touched, every act of courage that had rippled outward. She realized that heroism existed not only in grand battles but in small, quiet choices made every day. And as she looked toward the horizon, where smoke and sunlight mingled over a world scarred but unbroken, she understood the enduring truth: courage is a legacy, and hope is its inheritance. Even in the aftermath of devastation, humanity could shine. And in that light, Lena and Samuel saw the echoes of courage carried forward, whispering to the generations that would follow, reminding them that ordinary people could perform extraordinary acts and that even in the darkest times, the human spirit could endure. The bitter chill of early winter returned as Europe entered the final phases of the conflict. The war had left cities scarred, rivers choked with debris, and skies perpetually grey with smoke. Yet amidst the ruins, the resistance, led by Lena Fischer and Samuel Novak, had grown more coordinated, more determined, and more daring. Their operations now extended beyond city streets into the countryside, sabotaging enemy logistics and protecting civilians caught in the crossfire. Lena woke one morning to the muffled cries of survivors seeking refuge. Snow drifted through cracks in the walls of the abandoned warehouse that served as a safe house, and the fire in the corner barely warmed the cold, damp air. Samuel was already awake, examining a series of maps strewn across a wooden table. Intelligence indicates that a supply convoy carrying ammunition and medical supplies will pass through the southern rail line tonight, he said, pointing to a faded track on the map. We need to intercept it and reroute the supplies to the local resistance cells. This could save countless lives. Lena nodded, feeling the familiar surge of determination mixed with apprehension. Each mission carried risk, and the lives of those depending on them weighed heavily on her mind. "We'll need precision," she said. "No mistakes." Samuel's eyes softened, almost imperceptibly. "When have we ever done anything else?" By dusk, they set out toward the southern rail line, moving through alleys and over rooftops to avoid detection. Lena's senses were heightened. Every sound, every movement in the shadows could signify danger. The city was eerily quiet, as though it, too, was holding its breath. Reaching the rail line, Lena and Samuel split into teams. Lena, alongside Marek and Hannelore, approached the tracks from the east, while Samuel took the west. Their plan was simple but dangerous: disable the tracks at a key point, divert the convoy, and ensure that the supplies reached resistance forces instead of enemy hands. As the train approached, Lena's heart pounded. The rumble of engines and the clatter of wheels on steel tracks reverberated through the night. She positioned the explosives with practiced hands, the cold biting at her fingers, yet her focus remained unwavering. Every second mattered. When the convoy reached the designated point, Lena triggered the charges. Sparks flew, steel groaned, and the train came to a sudden halt. Guards scrambled in confusion, shouting orders into the cold night. Marek and Hannelore guided the captured prisoners to safety, while Lena covered their escape route. The operation was a success, but it came at a cost. One of the young recruits with them had been injured during the commotion. Samuel arrived moments later, ushering the team back towards safety. Lena glanced at the injured recruit, his face pale in the moonlight. "He'll make it," she said softly, though did not nod at her. "He has he." In the following days, the war as chaos intensified. Allied forces advanced steadily, but the Germans remained relentless, retaliating fiercely against resistance efforts. The network Lena and Samuel had built was under constant threat, yet they continued to coordinate missions, transport intelligence, and protect civilians. One evening, Lena and Samuel received word of a critical operation. A German officer in the city possessed detailed plans for a series of coordinated attacks on resistant strongholds. Capturing these documents could prevent hundreds of deaths. The mission was perilous, requiring infiltration into the officer's heavily guarded mansion. Lena studied the maps, memorizing patrol routes and entrances. "We'll need to move at night," she said, tracing a path through the shadows. "Every step must be precise." Samuel nodded. "We have one chance at this. Timing and stealth will be everything." That night they approached the mansion, cloaked in darkness. Lena's pulse quickened as they navigated past guards, scaling walls, and slipping through service entrances. Inside, the air was thick with tension, the faint sound of boots on marble floors echoing ominously. Lena located the safe containing the documents, her fingers deftly working the lock as Samuel stood watch. When the documents were finally in their possession, alarms blared. A guard had discovered their absence. Lena and Samuel moved swiftly, weaving through corridors and down staircases, evading capture by mere seconds. The mansion erupted into chaos behind them, but they disappeared into the night, carrying the intelligence that could save countless lives. Days turned into weeks, and the resistance efforts began to bear fruit. The German supply lines were disrupted, critical intelligence reached Allied forces, and civilians were increasingly protected from harm. Lena and Samuel's reputation grew, both as strategists and symbols of courage. Yet the toll of constant danger weighed heavily. Fatigue, grief, and the ever-present specter of death shadowed their every step. One afternoon, Lena visited a group of children who had been displaced by bombing raids. They played in a snow-covered courtyard, laughter piercing the winter air like fragile music. Lena knelt beside a small boy who clutched a worn toy soldier. "Why do you help us?" he asked, eyes wide with wonder. "Because someone has to," Lena replied softly. "Because hope is stronger than fear." The boy's face lit up with understanding, and Lena felt a renewed sense of purpose. Courage, she realized, was not just about missions or strategy, it was about instilling hope in those who had none. By the end of 1945, the war drew to its final stages in Europe. Lena and Samuel faced their most challenging missions yet, coordinating widespread evacuations, delivering critical intelligence to Allied command, and protecting remaining civilians as chaos enveloped cities and towns. Every operation was a test of courage, skill, and resilience. Lena reflected on her journey from the rubble of Dresden to the forests, rail lines, and safe houses across Europe. She had witnessed death, destruction, and betrayal, but also compassion, bravery, and resilience. Every small act, every choice to act despite fear, had created ripples that extended far beyond their immediate impact. Courage, she understood, was cumulative, built brick by brick, choice by choice. In the final days, Lena and Samuel stood atop a hill overlooking a liberated village. Smoke curled from chimneys, children ran through streets free from patrols, and survivors embraced one another, tears mingling with laughter. The air carried a sense of fragile renewal. Samuel placed a hand on Lena's shoulder. "We've done what we could," he said quietly. "But it is not just us. Every person who resisted, who helped, who protected others, our legacy is theirs too." Lena nodded, eyes glistening. "And that legacy will endure," she said. "Hope and courage never die. They echo across time, and every life touched by our actions." As they watched the sun rise over a continent scarred but unbroken, Lena realized that courage was not reserved for the extraordinary. It belonged to anyone willing to stand against injustice, to protect the innocent, and to act even when the world seemed lost. And in that light, the echoes of courage would continue, whispering to generations yet to come, reminding them that even in darkness, humanity could shine. Winter had fully descended over Europe, though the war was drawing to a close. Yet even as Allies advanced and cities were liberated, dangers remained. The Germans, desperate in the final months, intensified their patrols and reprisals, making every mission increasingly perilous. Lena Fischer and Samuel Novak moved with the quiet determination of those who had become both soldiers and protectors, carrying the hopes of countless civilians in their hands. That morning, Lena woke to the faint glow of dawn filtering through the cracks of the safe house. Samuel was already reviewing maps, tracing routes with meticulous precision. "We have one last mission before we can consider the city secure," he said, his voice calm but edged with urgency. "An enemy stronghold and industrial district is storing critical documents and supplies. If we capture or destroy them, we can cripple their operations permanently." Lena nodded, the weight of responsibility settling over her like a mantle. "We'll need a coordinated strike," she said. "Timing, stealth, and precision. We cannot afford mistakes." Samuel gave a slight smile. "When have we ever done anything else?" They spent the day planning, dividing the resistance into teams to approach the stronghold from multiple directions. Lena's team would enter through the service tunnels. Marek and Hannah would cover the perimeter, and Samuel would coordinate diversions to distract guards. Every movement was measured, every decision was calculated. As night fell, Lena's team approached the industrial district. The buildings loomed like silent sentinels, their windows shattered, walls scarred from previous bombings. Lena's heart pounded, each beat echoing in the cold night. She adjusted her satchel, feeling the familiar pressure of responsibility. Courage, she reminded herself, was not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. The service tunnels were narrow, damp, and treacherous. Lena led the way, moving silently, every step deliberate. The air smelled of damp earth and rust, a reminder of the city's decay. Samuel's diversion began as planned. Small explosions and strategic signals drew guards away from the tunnels, giving Lena and her team the cover they needed. Inside the stronghold, shadows stretched long and menacing. Lena located the safe containing the critical documents and supplies. Her fingers worked quickly, deftly manipulating the lock. When the safe opened, the contents revealed plans that detailed enemy troop movements, weapon stockpiles, and potential attack points. Capturing this intelligence would save countless lives in the coming days. As Lena secured the documents, a sudden noise froze her blood. Footsteps, guards were returning ahead of schedule. Lena signaled Marek and Hannah, and the team moved swiftly, narrowly avoiding detection. The labyrinthine tunnels became a maze of shadows and tension, each turn a test of nerves and skill. Emerging from the tunnels, Lena's team found themselves in a courtyard, the night air cold against their skin. Samuel met them there, guiding them toward the rendezvous point. The mission had been a success, but the danger was far from over. Enemy reinforcements were converging, and the city remained a precarious landscape. Over the following weeks, Lena and Samuel continued operations to secure the city and protect civilians. Each mission was a delicate balance of risk and reward. They coordinated evacuations, disrupted enemy supply lines, and delivered critical intelligence to Allied forces. Their actions, once small and localized, now had strategic impact, altering the course of operations in the region. Yet even in success, the human cost was evident. Resistance members were captured, civilians suffered, and the weight of loss pressed heavily on Lena's shoulders. Each night she reflected on the faces of those they had saved and those they had lost, understanding that courage often demanded sacrifice. One particularly harsh night, Lena and Samuel received intelligence about a trapped group of civilians in the northern district. The area had been recently bombed, and the survivors were cut off by debris and enemy patrols. Lena's team moved without hesitation, navigating the rubble-strewn streets to reach the stranded families. Among the survivors was a young girl clutching a doll, her eyes wide with fear. Lena knelt beside her, offering warmth and reassurance. "We are here now," she whispered. "You be safe with us." The child's small hand clutched hers, a fragile connection that reminded Lena of why they continued to act, why courage mattered. The group guided the civilians through the city, avoiding patrols and using hidden routes known only to the resistance. When they reached safety, Lena felt a surge of relief tempered by exhaustion. Each life saved reinforced the importance of their work, each act of bravery a testament to the human spirit. As spring approached in 1945, the war's end loomed on the horizon. Yet Lena and Samuel faced their most difficult challenge, coordinating a final, decisive operation to ensure the city's liberation while minimizing civilian casualties. The mission required infiltration, intelligence delivery, sabotage, and diversion all executed simultaneously. Lena stood atop a crumbling building, overlooking the city below. Samuel joined her, maps and plans spread across the rooftop. "This is it," he said softly. "The final push, we succeed, and the city is free, fair, and countless lives could be lost." Lena's gaze swept over the streets, the ruins, and the survivors. "We've gone too far to fail now," she said. "We do this for them, all of them." The operation began at dusk. Teams moved through the city with precision, coordinating with Allied forces and resistance members alike. Lena led a diversion, drawing enemy forces away from critical targets. Explosions echoed, gunfire rang out, and chaos enveloped the city. Amidst the turmoil, Lena and Samuel moved with unwavering focus, ensuring that civilians were protected and that critical intelligence reached its destination. By the early hours of the following morning, the operation concluded. The city was liberated, enemy forces had been neutralized or captured, and civilians were safe. Lena and Samuel stood amidst the ruins, exhausted but resolute. The weight of the past 2 years pressed on them, yet they felt a profound sense of accomplishment. Lena reflected on her journey from the rubble of Dresden to the forests, alleys, and streets across Europe. She had witnessed destruction, despair, and betrayal, yet she had also seen courage, resilience, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. Every act, no matter how small, had contributed to a legacy that would endure. Samuel placed a hand on her shoulder. "We did it," he said. "We saved lives, protected the innocent, and resisted tyranny. That is the mark of courage." Lena nodded, eyes glistening. "And the docility and here," she replied. "The echoes of courage will continue in every life we touched, in every story told, and in every choice to stand against injustice." As the sun rose over the liberated city, smoke and light mingling in a fragile dawn, Lena and Samuel understood the enduring truth of their journey. Even in the darkest times, humanity could shine. Courage was not reserved for the extraordinary, but belonged to anyone willing to act, to protect, and to hope. And in that light, the echoes of their courage would resonate across generations, whispering a message of resilience, compassion, and enduring hope.